In the unseen corners of the world's most luxurious hotels, the housekeeping staff hear everything. They know which senator takes bribes, which beloved celebrity is abusive, and which quiet, well-dressed billionaire is actually a monster. But the golden rule of the uniform is absolute silence. You scrub the blood off the Egyptian cotton, you restock the minibar, and you forget. Elara broke that rule. A fat, exhausted cleaner who was entirely invisible to the global elite. She made the fatal mistake of speaking up in a language she was never supposed to know, interrupting a man who could end her life with a single nod. This is what happens when the invisible woman catches the eye of a predator. The Baccarat Hotel in Midtown Manhattan was a monument to excess. Every surface was either reflective, gilded, or draped in imported velvet. For the guests who paid $15,000 a night for the Grand Salon penthouse, it was a playground. For Elara, it was a daily physical punishment. Elara was a heavy-set woman, her body soft and wide, taking up space in a world that demanded women be as thin and transparent as the crystal chandeliers hanging above them. Her thighs chafed under the cheap, stiff fabric of her housekeeping uniform, and her lower back constantly ached from leaning over expansive marble bathtubs. At 32, she had mastered the art of becoming part of the wallpaper. Rich people did not look at fat hotel maids. To them, she was merely an extension of the vacuum cleaner, a necessary appliance to keep their pristine worlds immaculate. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Martha, her stern supervisor, shoved a master keycard into Elara's plump hand. Penthouse suite. The guest specifically requested a quick turnover of the dining area while he's in a meeting. Get in, wipe down the Baccarat crystal table, empty the ashtrays, and get out. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak. Elara nodded, her double chin tucking into the stiff collar of her uniform. She wheeled her cart into the private elevator, her breathing slightly heavy as the doors slid shut. When she swiped her card and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the penthouse, the air inside was thick with tension and the sharp, expensive scent of Tom Ford tobacco cologne. 3 men were in the sprawling living room. 2 were massive, built like linebackers, wearing tailored Brioni suits that failed to hide the distinct bulges of shoulder holsters. The 3rd man sat at the head of the long dining table, Roman Castiglione. Elara didn't know his name yet, but she instantly recognized the danger radiating from him. He had pitch-black hair swept back from a sharp, aristocratic face, and eyes the color of dark obsidian. He wasn't just wealthy, he was apex royalty of an underworld Elara couldn't even fathom. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, his posture relaxed, yet he gave off the lethal stillness of a coiled viper. Elara kept her head down. She pulled a microfiber cloth from her apron and quietly moved to the far end of the dining table, pretending to focus entirely on polishing a smudge off the glass. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt too big, too loud, too present in the silent, suffocating room. Suddenly, a burner phone on the table violently vibrated, breaking the heavy silence. Roman gestured with 2 fingers. One of the bodyguards, a man with a jagged scar down his jaw, picked it up and answered. "Speak." A frantic, furious voice erupted through the phone's speaker. The man on the other end was screaming, his voice cracking with panic and rage, but the words were a harsh, guttural scramble. It wasn't English. It wasn't Italian, Russian, or Spanish. "Boss," the bodyguard said, his face paling. "It's Vanderberg's crew from Rotterdam, but I don't know what he's saying. He's losing his mind." Roman's jaw tightened, a dangerous muscle ticking in his cheek. "Put him on speaker, now." The bodyguard fumbled, pressing the button. The voice filled the luxurious penthouse, screaming over the sound of what sounded like distant sirens and gunfire. "De goederen zijn weg. Ze hebben de haven overvallen. Als je me het geld niet stuurt, verbrand ik alles wat van jou is." Roman stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "English, you son of a bitch. Speak English, he roared, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the baccarat crystal rattled. The voice on the phone didn't switch to English. Instead, the man laughed, a manic, desperate sound, and spat out another rapid-fire sentence. Je broer is de volgende, we weten waar hij is. Roman looked at his men. Get the translator on the line, now. He's not answering, boss, the other guard stammered, frantically tapping his own screen. He's off the grid. Elara stood frozen at the end of the table. Her knuckles were white around her cleaning cloth. Her chest heaved. She knew exactly what the voice was saying. Her late mother had been an immigrant from The Hague, and Elara had spent the first 10 years of her life in the Netherlands. Dutch wasn't just a language to her, it was the mother tongue she spoke in her own head when she was stressed. She tried to shrink back, to disappear, but her heavy work shoe squeaked loudly against the polished floor. Roman's head snapped toward her. His dark eyes locked onto her trembling form. For a terrifying second, he looked at her not as a maid, but as an intruder who had witnessed too much. "Get her out!" Roman growled, dismissing her existence entirely. The man on the phone started counting down. 10, 9, 8. Before Elara could stop herself, before her survival instinct could clamp her mouth shut, her voice rang out across the room. "He's counting," Elara blurted out, her voice surprisingly steady despite her shaking hands. "He said the goods are gone. They raided the harbour. He says if you don't send the money, he will burn everything that belongs to you." The entire room froze. The two bodyguards reached into their jackets, their eyes fixed on Elara. Roman slowly turned his full attention back to the fat, sweating maid in the corner. "What did you say?" Roman asked, his voice a low, terrifying whisper. The man on the phone shouted again. "Zeven, zes." Elara swallowed hard. He also said, "He said your brother is next. He knows where your brother is." A flash of pure, unadulterated murder crossed Roman's face. He snatched the burner phone from the table and held it out toward Elara. "Tell him," Roman commanded, his dark eyes boring into hers, "that if a single hair on my brother's head is touched, I will personally come to Rotterdam and flay him alive." In his language. "Tell him now." Elara dropped her cloth. She wiped her sweaty palms on her uniform skirt, stepping forward. She looked at the speakerphone, took a deep breath, and let the harsh, guttural consonants of her mother's tongue roll off her tongue. "Als je zijn broer ook maar met één vinger aanraakt," Elara spoke, her voice deepening with an authority she didn't know she possessed, "komt hij persoonlijk naar Rotterdam om je leven te vellen." The line went dead silent. Only the heavy breathing of the man in Rotterdam echoed through the speaker. Then a quiet click. He had hung up. Elara stood there, her chest rising and falling heavily. She looked up and found Roman Castiglione staring at her. He didn't look past her bulk. He didn't look at her with the usual mixture of pity and disgust she was so accustomed to from the wealthy men in this hotel. He looked at her with a piercing, analytical intensity that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "What is your name?" Roman asked softly. "Elara," she whispered. "Leave us, Elara." She didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her cart and practically fled the penthouse, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her ears. She was certain she was a dead woman. That night, Elara sat in her cramped, roach-infested apartment in Astoria, Queens, staring at her peeling linoleum floor. She had eaten half a gallon of cheap vanilla ice cream, trying to soothe the raw, terrified knot in her stomach. She replayed the look in Roman Castiglione's eyes 100 times. Men like him didn't just let loose ends walk away. He was mob, cartel, or something equally lethal. The tailored suits and luxury suites were just expensive sheep's clothing for a very large, very bloody wolf. At 2 a.m., she packed a ratty duffel bag with her few belongings. She planned to catch a Greyhound bus to Ohio at dawn. She had a cousin there. she could disappear. But exhaustion claimed her, and she fell asleep fully clothed on her lumpy mattress. When she woke up, it was 7 a.m. She was late for her shift. Panic flared in her chest, but she quickly remembered she was probably fired anyway. She grabbed her duffel bag, threw her worn winter coat over her broad shoulders, and walked out of her apartment building onto the dingy Queen Street. She stopped dead in her tracks. Parked illegally in front of her building, blocking a fire hydrant and gleaming aggressively in the morning sun, was a massive, pitch-black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in a junkyard. Leaning against the hood was the bodyguard from the penthouse, the one with the jagged scar on his jaw. He was wearing an immaculate charcoal suit and smoking a cigarette. As soon as Ilara stepped out, he dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his polished leather shoe. "Ilara," the man said. His voice was gravelly, lacking the refined edge of his boss. "Get in." Ilara hugged her duffel bag to her large chest. I don't want any trouble. I didn't see anything. I quit my job. I'm leaving." The man sighed, opening the heavy rear door of the SUV. "Mr. Castiglione isn't asking, sweetheart. You can get in the car, or I can put you in the trunk. But either way, you're coming to Tribeca. I strongly suggest the back seat. It has heated leather." Ilara looked up and down the street. A woman walking her dog quickly crossed to the other side, purposely looking away. Nobody was going to help her. Swallowing her terror, Ilara hauled her heavy frame up into the plush interior of the Escalade. The doors locked with a heavy, final thud. The drive was agonizingly silent. Ilara sank into the luxurious leather, feeling entirely out of place. She looked down at her faded jeans, her scuffed sneakers, and the extra weight she carried around her middle. She was a walking target of insecurity, and now she was trapped in a billionaire's war wagon. 40 minutes later, the Escalade pulled into an underground parking garage of a sleek, ultra-modern glass skyscraper in Tribeca. She was escorted into a private elevator that bypassed the lobby entirely, rocketing straight to the top floor. The doors opened into a sprawling 2-story loft. The walls were made of glass, offering a dizzying panoramic view of the Hudson River. The decor was aggressively masculine: dark woods, brushed steel, and black leather. Roman Castiglione was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He wore dark trousers and a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing intricate dark tattoos winding up his skin. He held a heavy crystal tumbler, the amber liquid inside, catching the morning light. "Sit, Ilara," Roman said, not turning around. Ilara hesitated, then walked over to an oversized, low-slung black leather sofa. She lowered herself onto it carefully, painfully aware of how much space she took up. She placed her duffel bag on her lap like a shield. Roman finally turned. He walked slowly toward her, his eyes dragging over her figure. It wasn't a look of dismissal. It was an appraisal, a cold, calculated reading of her worth. "I looked into you," Roman said, stopping just a few feet away. The scent of Tom Ford and expensive Macallan whiskey washed over her. "Ilara Vance, 32, unmarried, no children. Your mother was born in Amsterdam, died when you were 14. You have $94 in your checking account, and you were about to board a bus to Columbus, Ohio." Ilara's breath hitched. "Please, I won't say a word to anyone." Roman ignored her plea. He sat down in an armchair opposite her, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The man on the phone yesterday was Peter van der Berg. He is a very prominent, very violent distributor in Europe. He hijacked a shipment of mine worth $40 million, and he has taken my younger brother hostage. I don't want to know this," Ilara stammered, shrinking back into the couch. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Roman said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "My usual Dutch liaison was found in the East River early this morning with a bullet in his skull. Peter killed him to cut off my communication. He knows I don't speak the language. He knows my men don't. Roman took a slow sip of his whiskey. Peter thinks he has me deaf and blind. He doesn't know about the fat little maid hiding in the corner of my hotel room. The word fat hung in the air. Ilara flinched. She was used to insults, but hearing it from him felt like a physical blow. She looked down at her hands. You have billions of dollars. Hire a professional translator. I can't trust a stranger from an agency, Roman snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. This is an internal war. If I bring in an outsider, it leaks. But you are a ghost. Nobody looks at you. Nobody notices you. Peter will not suspect I have someone in my pocket. Roman stood up and closed the distance between them. He leaned over her, placing his hands on the back of the sofa, trapping her between his arms. The heat radiating off him was immense. I am offering you a job, Ilara. Ilara's heart pounded so hard she feared Roman could see it vibrating through her cheap coat. She stared at the expensive fabric of his shirt, too terrified to look up into his face. A job, she croaked. I clean toilets, Mr. Castiglione. I make beds. You speak fluent, unaccented Dutch, and you have the nerve to shout at a mob boss when my own men freeze. Roman corrected, his deep voice vibrating in the quiet room. You don't clean anymore. He reached out. Ilara stiffened, expecting a blow, but his large, calloused hand gently grasped her chin. He tilted her face up until she was forced to meet his obsidian eyes. Here is the deal, Roman said softly, his thumb brushing lightly against her jawline. The unexpected gentleness of the touch was more terrifying than a threat. You move in here. Today. You will shadow me 24 hours a day until I get my brother back and Vanderberg is a corpse. You will listen to every intercepted call, read every encrypted email, and translate every word. And if I say no? Ilara whispered, tears of pure terror welling in her eyes. Roman's thumb stopped moving. You saw my face. You heard my business. If you say no, my men take you back downstairs, and you take a very long, very permanent swim in the Hudson alongside my former translator. But if you say yes, I will pay you $1 million in cash when this is over. Ilara gasped. $1 million. It was a mythical sum. It was enough to buy a house, a business, a life where she never had to scrub another stranger's filth again. Why me? Ilara asked, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her plump cheek. You could force anyone. Because you didn't panic, Roman said, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again. Because you understood the leverage. And because... He paused, his eyes sweeping over her wide frame, lingering on the soft curves hidden beneath her ugly coat. You are not like the plastic, fragile women in my world. You have substance. You know how to survive. He released her chin and stood up, stepping back to give her air. Leo will show you to your room, Roman commanded, his tone returning to cold, businesslike detachment. Throw that garbage bag of clothes away. A tailor is arriving in an hour to fit you for a new wardrobe. If you're going to stand beside me, you will look the part. We have a call with Amsterdam at noon. Ilara sat frozen on the couch as Roman turned and walked toward a massive oak desk at the far end of the loft. She had walked into the Baccarat Hotel yesterday as a nobody. Today, she was a hostage, an employee, $1 million pawn in an international mafia war. An hour later, Ilara found herself standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in a luxurious guest bedroom. Two sleek, silent women from a high-end boutique were measuring her. They didn't sneer at her size. Under Roman's explicit orders, they treated her like royalty, draping her in rich, dark fabrics. Emerald silks and tailored black cashmeres that hugged her curves rather than hiding them like tents. When Ilara looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The exhaustion was still there in her eyes, but the clothes gave her a formidable presence. She looked solid. She looked powerful. The bedroom door clicked open. Roman stepped in, dismissing the tailors with a flick of his wrist. The women scrambled out, leaving them alone. Roman slowly circled her, his eyes drinking her in. Elara felt her cheeks flush under his intense scrutiny. She crossed her arms protectively over her large stomach. "Stop hiding," Roman commanded softly. He reached out and pulled her arms down to her sides. "You are taking up space in my house, Elara. Claim it. A woman who cowers cannot speak for me." "I'm not exactly standard mob wife material," Elara said, the self-deprecating words slipping out defensively. Roman stepped right into her personal space, his chest grazing hers. He looked down at her, a dark, predatory fire igniting in his eyes. "I don't want standard," he whispered, leaning in so close his lips almost brushed her ear. "Standard is boring. Standard shatters. Now, come to the office. Vanderberg is calling, and I need to know exactly how he plans to die." As Elara followed the ruthless mafia boss out of the room, a terrifying, thrilling realization washed over her. She was in a cage, surrounded by killers. But for the first time in her life, the most dangerous man in the room was actually seeing her. And heaven help her, she was starting to like it. Roman's private office was a fortress of soundproof glass and dark mahogany, suspended high above the chaotic streets of Tribeca. A sprawling digital map of the European coastline dominated the far wall, glowing with pulsating red markers. Elara sat rigidly in a high-backed leather chair that felt entirely too large for her, despite her size. She was flanked by Leo, the scarred bodyguard, and Dominic, Roman's tactical commander, a lean, terrifyingly quiet man with pale eyes. Roman stood directly behind Elara. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, smell the intoxicating blend of expensive tobacco and cedar. His heavy hands rested on the back of her chair, anchoring her, but also trapping her in his gravity. On the desk, a state-of-the-art encrypted satellite console hummed to life. "The connection is secure, boss," Dominic said, his fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. "We are routing through 3 different KPN servers in the Netherlands. Vanderberg won't be able to trace the IP back to New York." "Put him on," Roman ordered, his voice dropping into that lethal, quiet register that made Elara's stomach tighten. The console beeped twice, followed by the heavy, static-laced breathing of Peter Vanderberg. "Castiglione!" Peter's voice crackled through the speaker, arrogant and thick with malice. "Heb je je geld geteld, of huil je nog steeds om je kleine broodje?" Elara closed her eyes, letting the guttural sounds of her childhood wash over her, stripping away the New York accent, translating the malice into pure data. She pressed the button on her microphone. "He says, have you counted your money, or are you still crying over your little brother?" Elara translated, her voice trembling only slightly. Roman didn't hesitate. "Tell him the money is irrelevant. Tell him I want proof of life. I want to hear Matteo's voice, or the negotiations end right now, and I unleash the Albanians on his supply lines." Elara took a deep breath and leaned into the microphone. "Het geld doet er niet toe. Hij wil een teken van leven. Laat Matteo spreken, of de onderhandelingen stoppen nu en hij stuurt de Albanese op je aanvoerlijnen af." A harsh, barking laugh echoed from Rotterdam. "De Albanese? Je bent wanhopig, Roman. Maar goed, een klein cadeautje." "He says you are desperate," Elara whispered, looking up at Roman. "He's giving us a small gift." The line went muffled. There was the sound of a heavy metal door groaning open, followed by the sharp, wet sound of a fist hitting flesh. A young man cried out, a jagged, breathless sound of agony. "Roman!" The voice was faint, thick with pain but unmistakably American. "Roman, don't give them a dime. They're going to kill me anyway, The feed cut off with another sickening thud. Roman's grip on the back of Elara's chair tightened so violently the leather groaned. His knuckles were bone white. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. 50 miljoen, Peter's voice returned, cold and absolute. In Bitcoin. Binnen 24 uur. Anders stuur ik hem in stukjes naar je terug. 50 million, in Bitcoin. Within 24 hours, Ilara translated, her heart hammering against her ribs. Or he sends him back in pieces. Tell him he will have his money, Roman commanded, his voice eerily calm. Tell him I need 12 hours to liquidate the offshore accounts. If he touches Matteo again, the deal is off. Ilara relayed the message in rapid, flawless Dutch. Peter grunted his assent and abruptly cut the connection. The room plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. We don't have 50 million in liquid crypto ready to burn, Dominic said flatly, looking at Roman. And even if we did, Peter will kill him the second the transfer clears. It's standard cartel protocol. I know, Roman said, stepping away from Ilara's chair to pace the length of the room. We need his location, now. Dominic, did you get anything from the background audio? A street tram, a factory whistle. Nothing definitive, Dominic replied in frustration. Just echoes. It's an enclosed space, concrete walls, probably an underground bunker or an industrial freezer. Ilara sat frozen, replaying the audio in her head. She had been listening to the words, but underneath the words, underneath the violence, there was a rhythm. A very specific, mechanical thrumming that her mother used to complain about when they visited her uncle, who worked at the shipyards. It's not underground, Ilara said. Her voice was quiet, but in the tense silence of the office, it sounded like a gunshot. All three men turned to look at her. Ilara swallowed hard, suddenly intensely aware of her soft, wide body under the elegant emerald silk blouse Roman's tailors had provided. She forced herself not to shrink back. When Peter opened the door to where your brother is being held, I heard a horn, a very low, slow blast. It's an APM Terminal's automated crane. I know that sound. My uncle operated one. Dominic frowned, looking at his monitors. An automated crane. Ilara, there are thousands of shipping cranes in Europe. Not that kind, Ilara insisted, her confidence slowly building as the memory sharpened. That deep, double blast sound is a collision warning for the fully automated straddle carriers. They only use that specific model at the Maasvlakte 2 terminal in the port of Rotterdam. It's a highly restricted automated zone. No humans are supposed to be on the floor. Roman stared at her, his dark eyes calculating, predatory, and burning with sudden, fierce admiration. Dominic, Roman snapped. Pull up satellite imagery of Maasvlakte 2. Look for dead zones, abandoned maintenance sheds, or areas where the security cameras have been looped or disabled in the last 48 hours. Dominic's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within seconds, a high-resolution map of a sprawling geometric port facility filled the main screen. He zoomed in on the northern edge. Got it, Dominic murmured, a savage smile touching his lips. Maintenance Sector 4. The thermal imaging is showing an unusually high heat signature for an abandoned sector, and the CCTV feeds are on a perfect 4-hour loop. It's a blind spot. That's it, Roman said softly. He looked down at Ilara, the tension in his shoulders releasing just a fraction. He didn't thank her. Men like Roman Castiglione didn't say thank you. Instead, he stepped toward her, reached out, and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a jolt of fire straight down her spine. You just saved my brother's life, Ilara, he murmured, his thumb lingering on the pulse point of her neck, feeling her heart racing. Get some rest. Tonight, you are coming with me to the Pierre Hotel. We have a public appearance to make. Ilara's eyes widened. A public appearance? Me? I can't go to a high society gala. Look at me, Roman. I don't fit in those worlds. Roman's hand dropped to her waist. his grip firm, pulling her slightly forward in the chair so she was forced to look up into his face. "You fit exactly where I put you," he said, his voice a dark, possessive rumble. "And tonight, I am putting you on my arm. Let them look. Let them see the woman who holds my enemies' lives in her throat." The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a glittering sea of diamonds, tailored tuxedos, and women who looked like they subsisted entirely on champagne and sheer willpower. It was a charity gala for pediatric oncology, a perfect, sanitized cover for the city's elite to drink together, launder their reputations, and strike backroom deals. Elara stood in the opulent foyer, feeling like a massive imposter thumb sticking out amidst a collection of fragile porcelain dolls. The tailors had returned that afternoon with a gown that defied logic. It was black velvet, cut with architectural precision. It didn't try to hide her size, it weaponized it. The gown featured a plunging sweetheart neckline that pushed her heavy breasts up into a creamy, scandalous display, while the structured bodice pulled her waist in tight, allowing the velvet skirt to flare dramatically over her wide hips. She wore no necklace. Roman had insisted her bare throat was enough, but heavy diamond chandelier earrings brushed her collarbones. She looked terrifyingly beautiful. She looked like a mob boss's queen. But inside, she was still the sweaty maid from Queens, who was terrified of taking up too much space. "Breathe, Elara," Roman whispered, stepping up behind her. He was devastating in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. The tailored lines accentuated his broad shoulders and narrow waist, making him look like a dark god who had descended merely to judge the mortals in the room. He slipped his large hand around the curve of her waist, pulling her flush against his side. The heat of his body seeped through the thick velvet of her gown. "Everyone is staring," Elara murmured, her anxiety spiking as a group of rail-thin socialites in the corner openly pointed and whispered behind their champagne flutes. "They know I don't belong here. They're laughing at my size." Roman's jaw tightened. His hand slid from her waist, trailing up her spine until his fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of her neck. He pulled her head back slightly, forcing her to look him in the eye. "Listen to me very carefully," Roman said, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous intensity. "Those women starve themselves to be invisible. They shrink so weak men won't feel threatened by them. You do not shrink. You are solid. You are a woman I can actually hold without breaking." Elara's breath hitched at the raw heat in his words. "When we walk in there," Roman continued, his eyes tracing the line of her lips, "you will keep your head high. You will let them look. And if anyone disrespects you with so much as a glance, you tell me, and I will ruin their entire bloodline before dessert is served. Do you understand?" Elara nodded, a strange, intoxicating fire blooming in her chest. For the first time in her life, her body wasn't a burden. It was a fortress that this terrifying man worshipped. "Good," Roman murmured. He offered his arm. "Now, let's go play the game." They descended the grand staircase into the ballroom. It was exactly as Elara feared and exactly as Roman predicted. The room seemed to pause. Eyes tracked them, some filled with curiosity, others with naked envy or contempt. But with Roman's hand resting possessively on the small of her back, Elara felt a shield of invincibility wrap around her. For 2 hours, Roman navigated the room like a shark through a coral reef. He introduced Elara simply as "my associate," but his body language screamed possession. He never let her stand more than a foot away. He kept her wineglass full. He dismissed billionaires when they bored her. It was intoxicating, but the illusion shattered precisely at 10:30 p.m. Elara had stepped away to use the powder room, needing a moment of quiet away from the sensory overload. As she washed her hands at the marble sink, the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, the lock sliding home with a sharp clack. Elara looked up into the mirror. Standing behind her was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, blonde, wearing a tuxedo that didn't quite fit his broad, muscular frame. But it was his eyes that gave him away. They were flat, dead, and entirely devoid of the wealthy boredom that permeated the gala. "Mevrouw Vance," the man said softly, his heavy Dutch accent cutting through the quiet room. Ilara froze, the water running over her hands. "Mrs. Vance." He knew her real name. "You have a very lovely voice on the phone," the assassin continued, slipping a suppressed pistol from inside his tuxedo jacket. "Peter sends his regards." He figured Roman had found a new pet to translate for him. He just didn't expect the pet to be so large. The man raised the gun, aiming it squarely at Ilara's back. In her days as a maid, Ilara had learned how to clean up blood, but she had also learned the exact weight and density of high-end hotel fixtures. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Operating on pure, adrenaline-fueled instinct, Ilara grabbed the heavy, solid brass soap dispenser resting on the marble counter. With a primal roar that tore from her throat, she spun around and hurled the brass cylinder with all her immense, terrifying strength. The solid brass struck the assassin squarely in the bridge of his nose with a sickening crunch. The man stumbled backward, crying out in shock and pain, his gun firing blindly into the ceiling. The suppressed shot was quiet, just a sharp thwip, but the shower of plaster rained down on them. Before he could recover, Ilara threw her entire body weight forward. All 240 pounds of her slammed into the assassin's chest like a freight train. They crashed to the tiled floor, the gun clattering away under a bathroom stall. Ilara scrambled back, her velvet dress tearing at the hem, her chest heaving. The assassin was groaning, blood pouring from his shattered nose, trying to reach for a knife strapped to his ankle. The bathroom door exploded inward, ripped off its hinges with a splintering crash. Roman was there. He looked like the devil incarnate. His tuxedo jacket was gone, his tie ripped off. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second. Ilara panting against the wall, the bleeding Dutchman reaching for a blade. Roman didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, grabbed the assassin by the lapels of his cheap tuxedo, and hauled him off the floor. With brutal, calculated efficiency, Roman slammed the man's head into the edge of the marble sink. Once. Twice. The man went entirely limp, sliding to the floor like a rag doll. Roman stood over the body, his chest heaving, his knuckles bruised. He turned slowly to Ilara. She expected him to be furious that she had left his sight. She expected him to treat her like a fragile liability. Instead, Roman dropped to his knees in front of her, uncaring of the blood pooling on the pristine white tiles. His hands framed her face, his thumbs frantically wiping a smudge of plaster from her cheek. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a terror she had never heard from him. "Ilara, look at me. Are you bleeding?" "No," she gasped, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. "I'm okay. I hit him with the soap dispenser." A dark, chaotic laugh tore from Roman's throat. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. It wasn't the embrace of a boss protecting an asset. It was a man holding onto his anchor. "You are magnificent," Roman breathed against her skin, his lips hot against her pulse point. "You are absolute perfection." He pulled back just enough to look at her lips. There was no hesitation. Roman captured her mouth in a bruising, desperate kiss. It tasted like adrenaline, expensive wine, and absolute possession. Ilara moaned, her large hands tangling in his immaculate hair, kissing him back with a fierce, answering hunger. When they finally broke apart, the air in the bathroom was heavy and thick. "Dominic is moving the strike team into Maasvlakte right now," Roman said, his voice a low growl, his forehead resting against hers. "Let's go home, Ilara. Tomorrow, we burn Peter Vanderberg's world to the ground. The dawn broke over New York City in shades of bruised purple and grey, bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Roman's Tribeca loft. Elara had not slept. She sat at the mahogany desk in Roman's office, a heavy tactical headset clamped over her ears, an oversized cashmere sweater belonging to Roman swallowing her torso. The scent of his cologne on the wool grounded her as the chaos of war erupted through the comms. Thousands of miles away, in the cold, rain-slicked industrial graveyard of the Maasvlakte 2 port, Dominic and a team of 12 heavily armed operatives were breaching Maintenance Sector 4. Roman paced behind her like a caged panther. He held a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. The intimacy they had shared in the aftermath of the gala hung in the air between them. A silent, burning promise that would have to wait until his brother was safe. "Breach in 3, Dominic's voice crackled through the earpiece, cold and professional. 2, 1, explosives set. A muted, distant thump echoed through the line, followed immediately by the staccato rhythm of automatic gunfire. "We have resistance," Dominic shouted over the noise. 6 hostiles, engaging. Elara typed furiously on the laptop, monitoring the intercepted radio frequencies of the Dutch cartel. She translated the panic in real time. "Roman, Peter's men are screaming for backup. They didn't expect a frontal assault. They thought the assassin at the Pierre had taken you out." "Keep listening, Elara," Roman ordered, leaning over her shoulder, his hand resting warmly on the back of her neck. "Where is Matteo?" "Moving to the lower levels," Dominic reported. "Hostiles neutralized. We are at the door to the holding cell. Breaching." There was a tense silence that felt like hours. Elara stopped breathing. Roman's hand gripped her neck tighter. "Target secured," Dominic's voice finally came through, breathless but triumphant. "I repeat, Matteo is secure. He's battered, boss, but he's alive. He's walking." Roman let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension leaving his massive frame in a rush. "Get him to the extraction point. Burn the facility. Leave nothing." "Copy that, boss. Moving to extra." Dominic's voice was suddenly cut off by a deafening explosion. The audio feed shrieked with static, forcing Elara to rip the headset away from her ear with a cry of pain. "Dominic!" Roman roared, grabbing the microphone. "Dominic! Report!" Only the sound of burning debris and distant sirens echoed through the speakers. Then a new voice cut into the frequency. It wasn't Dominic. It was Pieter van der Berg. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Castiglione?" Peter laughed, the sound cold and metallic over the radio. "Je bent voorspelbaar." "He says you are predictable," Elara whispered, her blood running cold. "I knew you would trace the crane," Peter continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I let your little fat bird hear it. I let you come to Maasvlakte. And while your best men were walking into my trap with your brother, my men were emptying your European armories." Roman's eyes widened in realization. The kidnapping, the ransom, the slip of the crane. It was all a massive, elaborate diversion. "Say goodbye to your brother, Roman," Peter snarled. "And tell the maid I have a special bullet waiting for her." The frequency went dead. Roman violently swept his arm across the desk, sending the encrypted phone and his coffee mug smashing into the wall. "How?" he bellowed, his voice shaking the glass windows. "How did he know we were coming exactly at dawn? The operation was sealed. Only the 3 of us knew the timeline." Elara stared at the glowing monitors, her mind racing. Peter had known their exact movements. He had laid a trap, and he knew Elara was translating. The little fat bird. Her hands flew over the keyboard. She wasn't just a maid who spoke Dutch. Growing up poor, she had spent hours in internet cafes, learning how to bypass security to access free movies and games. She wasn't a hacker, but she knew how to look at server logs. "Roman," Elara said, her voice shaking as she opened the system diagnostics for Dominic's secure communication server. "Roman, look at this." He stepped up behind her, his chest heaving with rage. What? The KPN servers we used to route the calls. Elara pointed to a string of code on the screen. We thought we were hiding our location from Peter, but someone inside your network created a mirror, a back door. English, Elara, Roman growled. Someone didn't just listen to the call, Elara explained, looking up at him, her eyes wide with terror. Someone mirrored our outgoing traffic. They forwarded Dominic's tactical blueprints directly to an IP address in Rotterdam. Peter didn't outsmart you, Roman. You were betrayed. Roman stared at the screen, the betrayal settling over him like a suffocating blanket. Who had access to the server room yesterday? Elara pulled up the access logs. She scrolled down to the timestamps from the previous afternoon, right when they were negotiating the ransom. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the name on the screen, unable to process it. Elara, Roman demanded. Who is it? Elara looked up, tears springing to her eyes. It's Leo, Roman. It's Leo. The heavy oak doors to the office swung open. Standing in the doorway was Leo, the scarred bodyguard who had forced Elara into the Escalade just a few days ago. His tailored suit was immaculate, but the suppressed pistol in his hand was pointed directly at Elara's chest. I'm sorry, boss, Leo said, his gravelly voice entirely devoid of remorse. But the Dutch pay much better in crypto. And unfortunately, the maid knows too much. Before Roman could move, Leo pulled the trigger. The suppressed gunshot was not a cinematic roar. It was a sharp, mechanical thwip that barely registered above the hum of the city outside. But Roman Castiglione did not need to hear the shot to react. He had lived his entire life in the shadow of violence. The moment Leo's shoulder dipped, Roman threw his massive frame across the desk. He didn't reach for his own weapon. He reached for Elara. His body slammed into hers with the force of a wrecking ball, knocking her out of the heavy leather chair, just as the bullet shattered the high-resolution monitor right where her head had been a fraction of a second before. They crashed hard to the hardwood floor, Roman's dead weight pressing Elara into the expensive rug. A heavy grunt tore from Roman's throat. Above them, Leo cursed. He adjusted his aim, pointing the barrel down at the tangled bodies. Nothing personal, boss. Before Leo could pull the trigger a second time, Roman twisted on the floor, his hand shooting out to grasp the heavy, solid brass base of a luxury globe that rested on the floor beside the desk. With a primal roar, Roman hurled the brass sphere upward. It caught Leo squarely in the kneecap. The bone snapped with a sickening crack, and the scarred bodyguard collapsed with a shriek of agony, his pistol discharging blindly into the ceiling. Roman was up in an instant. He moved with a terrifying liquid speed. He kicked the gun out of Leo's trembling hand, grabbed the man by his immaculate silk tie, and hauled him halfway off the floor. Dutch crypto, Roman whispered, his voice a demonic rasp. Let's see if Peter can wire it to hell. Roman slammed his fist into Leo's throat. The cartel traitor gagged, his eyes rolling back as his windpipe crushed under the sheer, unforgiving force of the Mafia Boss's blow. Leo convulsed once, twice, and went entirely still, dropping heavily to the blood-spattered floor. Elara scrambled backward, her breathing ragged, her back hitting the mahogany desk. She looked at the dead man, then at Roman. The terrifying god of the New York underworld was swaying on his feet. Roman! Elara gasped, her eyes locking onto the spreading dark stain on the left side of his crisp white shirt, just below his collarbone. You're hit. Roman looked down at his own chest with mild annoyance, as if a bird had soiled his suit. Through and through. It missed the artery. He took a step toward her, stumbled, and caught himself heavily against the desk. We have to move. If Leo is compromised, the building's security is compromised. Peter's hit squad will be in the elevators right now. Elara didn't freeze. The panicked maid who had scrubbed toilets at the Baccarat Hotel was gone. burned away by the adrenaline and the raw reality of survival. She pushed herself up, her large, solid body moving with unexpected agility. "Lean on me," she ordered, stepping beneath his good arm and wrapping her thick, sturdy arm around his waist. Roman hesitated for a fraction of a second, entirely unaccustomed to relying on anyone, let alone a woman. But as he looked down at Ilara, her jaw set, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, protective fire, he let out a ragged breath and transferred his weight to her. She took it effortlessly. Her body, the very thing she had been taught to hate her entire life, was exactly what he needed. She was strong. She was an anchor. "The private garage," Roman grunted, pointing toward a hidden door paneled into the bookshelf. "Service elevator." They moved as a single, staggering unit. Ilara practically carried him through the hidden passage, their harsh breathing echoing in the narrow, concrete-lined shaft. She hit the button for the sub-basement. "Where are we going?" Ilara asked, her voice tight as she pressed her hand against his bleeding shoulder, the hot, sticky blood soaking through her cashmere sweater. "Your network is compromised. We can't call your men. We don't know who else Peter bought." "Red Hook!" Roman ground out, his skin growing terrifyingly pale. "Brooklyn, I have a warehouse, analog locks, no cameras, no Wi-Fi, a ghost property. Just drive." When the elevator doors dinged open into the damp, echoing sub-basement, Ilara didn't go for the gleaming black Escalades or the sleek Ferraris. She knew better. Those had GPS. Those were targets. Instead, she dragged Roman toward a dusty, unassuming 2018 Chevy Tahoe parked near the maintenance lockers. The keys were in a magnetic lockbox on the wall. Ilara smashed the plastic box with a fire extinguisher, grabbed the keys, and shoved Roman into the passenger seat. As she peeled out of the underground garage, roaring up the ramp into the blinding morning light of Manhattan, two black Mercedes SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the building's main lobby. Heavily armed men poured out. Ilara kept her head down, merged into the chaotic New York traffic, and disappeared. The warehouse in Red Hook was a cavernous, rusting monument to a bygone industrial era, sitting on the edge of the freezing East River. Inside, it smelled of motor oil, salt, and old dust. It was completely off the grid. Ilara helped a semi-conscious Roman onto a sagging leather sofa in the dusty office at the back of the building. His breathing was shallow. "First aid kit," Roman rasped, his head falling back against the cushions. "Under the floorboards. Safe combination is 42 12 99. Ilara found the hidden safe, yanked out a heavy military-grade medical kit, and rushed back to his side. She had no medical training, but she had grown up in neighborhoods where you didn't call ambulances for gunshot wounds. You fixed it, or you died. She ripped open his blood-soaked shirt, exposing his heavily tattooed chest. The bullet had punched clean through his upper shoulder. It was ugly, but he was right. It had missed the vital veins. "This is going to hurt," Ilara said, her voice shaking as she opened a packet of Quick Clot combat gauze. "Do it," he commanded, his jaw locked. Ilara packed the wound. Roman's massive body went entirely rigid, a guttural groan ripping through his gritted teeth. But he didn't pull away. He stared up at her face, watching the tears of focus stream down her plump cheeks. She worked quickly, taping the heavy bandages down, her large, capable hands surprisingly gentle against his skin. When she was finished, she slumped back on the floor, exhausted, wiping the sweat and blood from her forehead. Roman reached out with his good arm, his heavy fingers wrapped around her wrist, pulling her up from the cold concrete and dragging her onto the sofa next to him. "I'm covered in blood," she protested feebly, trying to pull her wide hips away to give him space. "I'm ruining your couch." "Stop," Roman murmured, his voice thick with exhaustion and something much darker, much deeper. He pulled her flush against his uninjured side, wrapping his arm around her waist, anchoring her against him. Stop apologizing for existing, Ilara. Stop trying to disappear. Ilara froze, her cheek resting against the steady thumping rhythm of his heart. Every woman I've ever known in this life, Roman said quietly, his thumb stroking the soft curve of her stomach beneath the ruined cashmere, was an investment, a political alliance, a fragile, polished diamond meant to look beautiful and say nothing. They would have left me to die on that floor. He shifted, turning his face to press his lips against her hair. You didn't run, he whispered. You picked up a weapon. You carried me. You saved my life. Again, I had nowhere to go. Ilara whispered back, her heart hammering against her ribs, terrifyingly vulnerable. You have here, Roman said, his voice a low, absolute vow. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look into his dark, feverish eyes. You have me. I see you, Ilara. I see all of you. And I want all of it. He kissed her. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled collision of the hotel bathroom. This was slow, deep, and devastatingly tender. It was a man worshipping at an altar he didn't know he had been searching for. His large hand mapped the wide curve of her hips, the soft roll of her waist, holding her with a fierce reverence that shattered decades of Ilara's self-hatred in a matter of seconds. For the first time in her 32 years, Ilara felt entirely, undeniably beautiful. Suddenly, a harsh, metallic ringing shattered the quiet of the warehouse. Roman stiffened. He pointed to a heavy black analog telephone mounted on the concrete wall, a secured, hard-wired line that couldn't be hacked or traced. Ilara scrambled up and pulled the receiver from the cradle. Hello? Ilara? A ragged, exhausted voice coughed on the other end. It's Dominic. Ilara gasped, covering her mouth. Dominic, you're alive. Roman, he's alive. Roman sat up, wincing, his eyes blazing with sudden lethal clarity. He gestured for her to put it on speaker. The blast took out half my team, boss, Dominic reported, his voice filled with static and pain. But I got Matteo out. We went dark. We're in a shipping container on a freighter heading for international waters. We are safe. Roman closed his eyes, a profound weight lifting from his shoulders. Good work, Dom. Where is Peter? He's coming to you, Dominic said, his tone turning grim. Peter thinks you're dead. He thinks Leo finished the job. He's flying into New York tonight to personally seize your territory and empty your physical vaults. He's landing at a private airstrip in Teterboro in 3 hours. He has 50 men with him. Roman looked at Ilara. The tender, wounded man on the couch vanished, replaced instantly by the apex predator of the American Mafia. 50 men, Roman murmured. And I have no network, no armory, no soldiers. Ilara looked around the dusty, analog warehouse. Her eyes landed on an old rusted marine radio sitting on a workbench, then to the blueprints of the city's power grid pinned to the wall. Her mind, trained to see the invisible infrastructure of the world, began to race. You don't need an army, Roman, Ilara said, a dangerous, brilliant spark igniting in her eyes. She walked over to the workbench and picked up a heavy wrench, her posture straightening, her presence filling the room. Peter relies on digital supremacy. He thinks he owns the grid. But this city has a lot of blind spots if you know where the garbage goes. Roman stared at his queen, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face. What are you thinking, Ilara? I'm thinking, she said, tossing the wrench from hand to hand, that it's time Peter Vanderberg learns what happens when you mess with the hired help. The private terminal at Teterboro Airport was eerily silent under the midnight sky. A sleek, black Gulfstream jet taxied to a halt near an isolated hangar. Peter Vanderberg stepped off the staircase, adjusting the collar of his bespoke trench coat. He was a tall, arrogant man with cruel, icy blue eyes. Behind him, 24 heavily armed mercenaries fanned out across the tarmac, their assault rifles sweeping the empty shadows. "Where is Leo?" Peter snapped at his lieutenant, checking his encrypted phone. He was supposed to be here with the keys to the Tribeca vault. "Radio silence, sir," the lieutenant replied. "The network is dark." Suddenly, the massive floodlights surrounding the hangar flickered and died, plunging the tarmac into absolute blinding darkness. "Flashlights!" Peter roared, drawing his weapon. Before his men could activate their tactical lights, a voice echoed through the hangar's massive PA system. It was a woman's voice, and she was speaking flawless, unaccented Dutch. "Welcome in New York, Peter," the voice purred. It was smooth, mocking, and entirely unafraid. Peter froze. He recognized the voice. "The maid!" He sneered into the darkness. "Castiglione's fat little pet. Where are you hiding, pig?" "I'm not hiding," Ilara's voice echoed from the speakers, dripping with venom. "I'm just watching you walk into the incinerator." High up in the rusted scaffolding of a forgotten air traffic control tower a mile away, Ilara sat with an analog marine radio patched into the airport's archaic emergency broadcast system. She didn't need to hack a computer. She had physically spliced the wires using duct tape and a pocket knife. "They're grouped at the base of the jet, Roman," Ilara said into her headset, switching to English. "He brought 24 men. They are blind. Copy that, Mia Regina." Roman's voice crackled in her ear. "My queen." On the tarmac, Peter's men formed a defensive circle. "Find the breaker! Get the power back!" Peter screamed. They never got the chance. Roman had not called his digital network. Ilara had advised him to call his ghosts, the old guard, the retired enforcers, the men who operated before smartphones and crypto, the men who owed their lives to Roman's father. They had answered the call. From the shadows of the hangars, a fleet of heavy, unlit semi-trucks suddenly roared to life. They didn't fire weapons, they simply accelerated. 80,000 pounds of American steel slammed into the Gulfstream jet, crushing its landing gear and snapping the wing like a twig. Aviation fuel flooded the tarmac. Peter's men scattered in absolute panic, firing blindly into the dark, but their bullets sparked harmlessly against the reinforced armor of the heavy trucks. Roman stepped out of the shadows. He wore a black tactical vest over his bandaged shoulder, holding a heavy pump-action shotgun. He looked like a god of war. "Castiglione!" Pieter shrieked, covered in aviation fuel, aiming his pistol wildly. "You're dead!" "I have a very good doctor," Roman replied coldly. Roman didn't monologue. He didn't gloat. He simply raised the shotgun and fired. The blast caught Peter squarely in the chest, lifting the cartel boss off his feet and throwing him backward into the wreckage of his own multi-million-dollar jet. He hit the ground and did not move. Seeing their boss dead and smelling the highly explosive fuel pooling around their ankles, the remaining Dutch mercenaries threw down their weapons, raising their hands in the darkness. The old guard stepped out of the trucks, securing the prisoners with zip ties. It was over in less than 3 minutes. An hour later, the New York skyline was bleeding gold and pink with the rising sun. Roman stood on the roof of the Red Hook warehouse, watching the light hit the water. The heavy steel door creaked open behind him. Ilara stepped out into the chilly morning air. She was wearing Roman's oversized coat over her ruined dress, her hair messy, her face smudged with dirt. To Roman, she had never looked more magnificent. He turned, dropping his cigarette, and closed the distance between them. He wrapped his good arm tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Dominic just called," Roman murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "He and Matteo touched down in Sicily. The Dutch cartel is scrambling. The war is over." "And the $1 million?" Ilara asked, a small tired smile playing on her lips. Do I still get my payout? Roman let out a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated against her chest. He kissed her, deep and possessing, claiming her mouth with a fierce, burning permanence. You don't get a payout, Ilara, Roman whispered against her lips, his dark eyes locking onto hers with absolute devotion. You get the bank. You get the empire. You are never cleaning another room, and you are never hiding in the shadows again. From today until the day I die, you are exactly where you belong, at the head of the table. Ilara looked out at the city she had scrubbed and polished for years. She was no longer a ghost. She was no longer invisible. She leaned her heavy, beautiful body into the most dangerous man in New York, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, wonderfully safe. Wow! What a phenomenal conclusion to Ilara and Roman's story. From an invisible hotel maid to the undisputed queen of the New York underworld, Ilara proved that true strength isn't about fitting into society's mold. It's about surviving, fighting back, and claiming your power. Roman learned that the most valuable asset he could ever possess wasn't money or territory, but a woman of absolute substance who would stand with him in the fire. If you love this intense, twist-filled dark romance and want to hear more stories about powerful women who defy the odds and the dangerous men who worship them, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love mafia drama and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new upload. What was your favorite moment in Ilara's journey? Let me know in the comments below.